All right, I think we're just kind of waiting for the room to fill up here, and then once they let me know, we'll get started. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, if you have any questions that you think of during the presentation, just type them right into the chat box when you think of it, and then at the end of the presentation, when we're all done, I will go ahead and answer them. I'm going to turn off my VHF radio real quick so don't hear that during the presentation. Sorry, I was actually told the chat's disabled, but if you hit Q&A, you can ask questions there. So if you do have questions during the presentation, you can go ahead and ask them in the Q&A. And let's see. I'm gonna hit lower. Don't worry about raising your hand because I'm probably not going to stop and ask questions. I've got this kind of timed out. The goal is to keep it at about 45 minutes to 50 minutes because I find that's typically how long anybody wants to listen to someone ramble. And then at the end, we'll answer any questions. So like I said, if you have questions and you're online, you can ask them in the Q&A box. If you're in person, I believe Jeff Mills is in the room and he's going to take care of passing the microphone around so folks can ask questions live.
Okay, I think we're ready to do it. You've got a room full of people here, all of your biggest fans, been watching you online through social media. Now, we always knew he was a rock star, but now he's an international rock star, right? Okay, so we're set. We're ready to go. Yeah, let's do your thing.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks everybody for showing up and attending today. I'm very humbled to have been asked by the Nautical Education Committee to kind of talk about going cruising full time and what it takes to kind of live this life out here on the water. So if you have been following along on my trip, I've got a blog on Facebook called Life at 5 Knots. I try and post updates every day that something happens. If you haven't been following along, I encourage you to check it out. It's been kind of a fun experience. I really started it as a way to document my trip for myself and my family and my friends. And it's grown beyond that, which is wonderful. Pleased to have everybody here with us. And it's been kind of fun preparing for this talk to go back and read some of the posts and look at pictures and remember all the interesting and fun things that have kind of happened along the way. So if we're ready in the room, Jeff, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's see here. Obviously, a disclaimer. I am not a life coach. I'm closer to a pirate than a life coach. So any advice that you see here on this presentation, please, take with a grain of salt. But yeah, let's see. Here we go. All right. So about myself, my name is Graham. I'm from Chicago. I grew up in the suburbs. I spent the last decade living in the city. I've worked in motorsports for about a decade now and event management. I'm a U.S. Coast Guard licensed captain. I started sailing reluctantly at the age of 6 and fell in love with it by the age of 16. So thank you to my parents for that. Started teaching around 16 years old up in Lake Forest. I've done 8 Chicago Yacht Club Race to Mackinac races. I've done 2 solo Mac challenges. I'm a delivery captain, sailing instructor, paddy diver. I've got 2 Basenji, which are type of African dog. And I've got well over 15,000 now with this trip, probably closer to 19 or 18,000 nautical miles documented at sea. On the trip with me, it is just myself. I've had some family and friends come in and pop in along the way, but it's just myself and my 2 dogs. I've got 2 dogs, Bosun and Hurley. They're both Basenjis, which is an African dog that can't bark, which actually makes a great boat dog. And happy to have them here with me. So we'll start off with kind of what is cruising. A quote that I see all the time that I think is very true is cruising is just fixing your boat in remote places. And to me, that's proven true multiple times along this trip. But yeah, I mean, cruising is going out and traveling off the beaten path and finding a life out here on the water. Cruising could be for a day or a weekend or a couple weeks or a year or longer. It's kind of up to you. For me, I saw this cartoon probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago on the internet, and it just kind of struck a chord with me. And I actually at one point I had this printed up and it was on my fridge, and I kind of looked at it every day as a reminder of what I wanted to try and go do out there on the water. If you haven't seen it, I'll post it on my Facebook page after this. So what is cruising? What is going cruising? Like I said, it's whatever you want it to be. It can be as long as you want. It can be a day, it can be a weekend, it can be a month, it can be a year. It forces you to break free from that daily routine. And it encourages you to go explore a world beyond the beaten path. When you're cruising, you tend to be more self-reliant. It's just kind of you and whoever's with you on your boat out here against the elements. You meet new people, you challenge yourself in new ways. I've enjoyed it particularly because you get to expand your worldview. You get to get outside of that bubble that you surround yourself with, friends and family, both at home and online. I've met people from all over the world, just in this short trip from Chicago to the Bahamas. And it's been a fantastic way to meet new people along the way. In fact, I actually just met a couple here that's anchored about 2 boat lengths away from me that are good friends with my cousin, that they met them in the Bahamas. So it's a small world when you get out here and actually start exploring it. And the good news is that home will always be there when you want to come back. So for me, Chicago is home. A lot of you who are watching Chicago is home. Chicago's never going to go anywhere. So if you go cruising and when you're ready to come back, it will still be there. So yeah, I guess we'll kind of get started with the first part of this presentation is kind of planning my escape from the real world and kind of how this whole idea came to be. I started cruising I've been sailing my whole life, but I started cruising in about 2015. A good friend of mine, Lindsay Irwin, invited me and some friends to go down to Antigua and spend 2 weeks down there doing race week. So we went down, chartered a cat out of St. Martin. We sailed from St. Martin to Antigua. And then we spent a week in St. Bart's after that. And it was awesome. I had done a lot of racing growing up. I hadn't done a lot of just like living on a boat and hanging out. And it totally changed my perspective of what life on the water can be like. It doesn't have to be buoy racing or distance racing. You can just hang out and go explore places and go snorkel and dive and kind of take your hotel with you. It was really eye-opening for me. After that, I went and taught some classes in the British Virgin Islands for a few Februaries in a row, teaching sailing and teaching cruising, which continued to kind of fuel my desire to go live this life. I'd charter a boat with friends 1 week every year. We go down and spend a week in the British Virgin Islands. This past year, we actually had enough people that wanted to do it. We had 2 catamarans. So that's kind of a fun way to get started in this if you're thinking it's something you might want to do. And then from there, I kind of realized I wanted to do this long term and that this was something that I wanted to try and do as my daily life. So I started kind of putting together a plan on how that was going to work. And one of the things that fueled that was every time I went to the Caribbean and went chartering or went to teach a class and we'd go snorkeling or scuba diving, I noticed that the marine life and the coral life around me was degrading almost in front of my eyes. And through that and through some friends, in 2021, I got invited to go and do a research trip with the Shed Aquarium, which was kind of part of what fueled my desire to go cruising before retirement, which is what a lot of people do. I got to spend 2 weeks on the Shed Aquarium boat with scientists and other fellow citizen scientists, we'll call ourselves, studying corals and what's going on. As you can see in this one picture on the bottom right, we're looking at what we would refer to as a brain coral. And it's completely white, except for where it's dead and algae has grown over it. And that's what we call coral bleaching. So we got to spend a week down diving all throughout the Florida Keys, doing 5 or 6 dives a day, taking samples, taking surveys, planting corals. It was really an amazing experience, and it made me realize how quickly the oceans are really failing. The coral reefs, we've already lost about 35 to 40% of them around the world. And the latest statistic I heard was that by 2023, we're on track to lose almost 90% of the coral reefs around the world. And if you think 2023 sounds far away, 2030 sounds far away. 2030 is only a few years away. It's 2023 right now. So by 2030, we're on track to lose up to 90% of the corals on our planet, which is scary. Corals really are the foundation of our oceans and therefore the foundation of life. If all of you take a breath with me and then exhale and then take another breath, one of those two breaths came from a coral reef. So corals are really critical, not just to the ocean's health, but to our health and as humans, and the planet surviving. So seeing what was happening there was really eye-opening and made me realize that if I waited much longer to go cruising and to go scuba diving and to go explore the world, that there might not be much of it left. So this picture here is actually one of the coral farms that the Shed Aquarium and the Coral Research Foundation have, where they grow staghorn coral, and then we fragment it and take it out to reefs and actually plant it. So from there, I realized I wanted to go cruising, but I didn't have a boat at the time. I had just sold my boat to a lovely couple that actually took it to Australia, and I was boatless, and the market was hot for boats with COVID, just like RVs. And I was kind of waiting for it to cool off before I would buy something that would be appropriate. And then lo and behold, I delivered a boat to Waukegan one day, and up in Waukegan, I found this boat for sale, happened to be owned by somebody that had a lot of mutual friends. And I reached out, and we were able to come to a deal, and it worked out great. One of the things you'll notice about this boat is it's got a particularly shallow draft, which makes it not great for racing, but great for cruising, especially here in the Bahamas, where there's a lot of spots if you draw more than 4 or 5 feet, you can't get into. So it's a 1984 Irwin. It's a very simple boat. It's a production boat from the 80s, nothing fancy, but it's got a good solid Yanmar engine in it. It's got a short draft. It only draws 48 feet vertically, which means I can go up and down the ICW easily, which makes it easy for cruising. Holds about 30 gallons of fuel, holds about 80 gallons of water, and we cruise along at 5 or 6 knots, hence the name Life at 5 knots. It's a simple sail plan, which was important for me when looking for a boat. It's a sloop. It's got a furling Genoa and a mainsail with a stack pack. I've also got a spinnaker that I can fly if I want to. For 34 feet, it's got a large interior volume, which makes it comfortable for living on. And it does have a centerboard, which is kind of unique, which means if I release a line, a section of the keel kind of drops down and adds another 4 feet to my draft, giving me 8 feet total, which makes it great for like yesterday when I was crossing the Gulf Stream on my way to the Bahamas. And then once I get here, you can crank that up and it lowers your draft to 4 feet. Makes it easy for getting into all sorts of different places. It's got a propane galley, so cooktop, oven. We got a fridge, freezer, fun stuff, separate head, shower. So it's for 34 feet. It's a pretty livable boat. So I had my boat. I realized I wanted to go cruising. What was the plan? The plan kind of came about when I came back from the British Virgin Islands last February and was walking the dogs one night in a blizzard and was thinking to myself, I just bought a sailboat. Why am I still here? Why am I here this winter? So I decided I was going to go south for the winter of 2022-23. As far as how south, I didn't really have a plan. I was kind of thinking maybe get down to the Caribbean, maybe hang out in the Bahamas. Didn't really know. My goal was definitely to scuba dive as much as possible. And then the plan was to actually spend this coming summer cruising up the East Coast all the way up to Maine, spending some time in Newport, spending some time in Provincetown, some other great destinations along the way. And that was just kind of a rough plan. With cruising, you'll find that you can have a rough idea of what you want to do, but life and weather and your boat and tides will actually dictate what you get to do. As far as going cruising and putting this plan together and trying to come up with when I was going to leave and should I leave, is it the right time to leave, you'll find that you always come up with reasons not to do something in life. Whether it's work or family or financial goals or the fact that change is difficult or you're comfortable where you're at, there's always a dozen reasons why you shouldn't go do something. But I just kind of kept thinking back to that cartoon that I showed earlier on. And I kind of kept thinking back to the fact that when I've gotten older, the ocean may be in a very different state than it is right now. And there may not be as much stuff as I want to see when I actually get to go cruising. So I kind of realized that regardless of all these other reasons why I shouldn't go cruising right now, this was the time to do it. So reasons to go, which was kind of the list I came up with why I should go do this. Life is short. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. As remote work becomes more popular, which is an unexpected benefit of COVID, I would say. I've seen a lot more people go cruising, which is great, but it also means that a lot of these remote destinations become more crowded, which kind of takes away from the charm of going cruising. And then the other thing was, I kind of talked to other sailors about my plans to do this around the boatyard and the harbor and the yacht club. Was, they always told me, I wish I did that when I was your age. You should go do it right now. And for me, that kind of struck a chord. And then along with that, what's the worst thing that happens? Going cruising seems like a big decision and a big life change, and it certainly is. But if I had gotten down to Florida and realized, like, whoa, I hate living on a sailboat, dealing with the dogs in the boat is too difficult, I just want to go back home, you can always just sell the boat and go back home. So it's not something that if you decide to go do it, you're stuck doing it forever, which I think a lot of people kind of lose sight of that. So I bought this boat in end of 2021. By the end of 2022, October 2022, we'd put 1,878 nautical miles under the keel. That was 2 MAC races, a solo MAC race, and a Chicago Yacht Club race to Mackinac. 2 returns on those trips, a couple trips to Saugatuck for some cruising, weekend cruising, and a lot of fun day sailing with friends. To get ready for this trip, there's some stuff I had to do to the boat to get it ready. First off was safety gear, right? If you're going to go out and spend a bunch of time on the ocean or in these remote islands, you got to have adequate safety gear. So I've got a large medical kit with a lot of additional stuff that you probably wouldn't find on your regular day sailing boat. I added a bimini, which is a canvas cover for the cockpit with some solar, 3-stage water filter for drinking, cabin fans, all new electronics throughout the boat, chart plotter, VHF, AIS, all kinds of safety gear, an inverter so I can run regular household appliances like my laptop, or for example, the Starlink that I'm using to talk to you all right now. And then I did a lot of engine maintenance. With cruising, preventative maintenance is key. Getting ahead of problems before they can actually become problems will save you a lot of money and hassle down the road, especially if somewhere down the road is on a remote island where there isn't a Yanmar dealer. So I put on a new high output alternator, belts, hoses, sea strainer, all that fun stuff. Added some lithium batteries to the boat, which we can get into in the Q&A session. I know I've already seen one question about that. And just kind of made sure that the boat was ready for somewhat comfortable living aboard. So then decided to go cruising. I got my boat ready to go, where I want to go. How do I adjust my life to this? I quit we'll call it my real job in early July of 2022. In fact, I think I quit just after the solo MAC race was my last day. And that was in the motorsports industry. I now work for myself remotely wherever I kind of want to be, planning and producing some motorsports events all over the US. That whole thing started with an event that actually started at Chicago Yacht Club back in 2021. And then I had to come up with my budget. How much was I going to save up for this trip? How much was it going to cost? What was my average weekly, monthly spend going to be? I got rid of my apartment that I was renting in the Gold Coast and put most of my stuff in storage. There's a picture of Bosun, very confused, in my empty apartment there. Mail, what do you do with mail? There's actually a bunch of different online forwarding services that all my mail goes to a PO box. And then they scan it, I can open it on my phone. And then friends and family, just kind of getting friends and family ready. I'm sure a lot of you have family that you're close to. And when I kind of sprung this idea on my family, I got some very confused looks to begin with, but to their credit, they came around to the idea and they have actually come and visited me. So, and they can still come visit. And that's one of the other things is when you go to some of these amazing places, you want to share it with people. I would love to share this experience in the Bahamas with folks. So I've got a couple different friends that are coming down to visit. And then having dogs in the boat certainly adds to the complication of things, both between where do they go to the bathroom and dealing with things like customs. Typically, if we're not out on passage, sailing from one port to another, we take the dinghy to shore a couple times a day. They can get off the boat and go walk around, do their business. In the event that we're somewhere where they can't get off the boat, I've got like a grass mat that they can use on deck. So we quit our job, we bought our boat, we figured out where we were going to go. Now it was time to kind of untie the lines and sail away, which if you talk to anybody that's gone cruising for an extended period of time, the hardest part of that whole planning process is actually untying the lines and sailing away. So I don't know if this clip is going to play over Zoom remotely. We're going to try it and see if it does. I left from Chicago Yacht Club Belmont Station on October 25th, and our fearless on the water director, Chuck Neville, happened to be there. And he happened to ask me a very poignant question, which I thought I would share with all of you here. Please.
Do you have like any parting words of wisdom?
If you want to go on a trip like this, you should just go do it and not wait for the time to be right, because the time will never be right.
That's right. I agree.
So with that, we put it into gear, and away we go.
Away you go, buddy. Good luck.
Thanks, Chuck.
Be safe. Hope to see you in
We'll see you somewhere.
somewhere.
So that was October 25th, leaving Belmont, Chicago Yacht Club Belmont Station, I should say. I had some friends come and help me drop the mast, and from there I headed down the rivers. So we left on the 25th of October. We went through the Chicago River, the Illinois Sanitary and Ship Canal, the Des Plaines River, the Illinois River, the Upper Mississippi River, the Ohio River, the Cumberland River, Kentucky Lake, Tennessee River, Tennessee Tom-Bigby Waterway, and then the Tom-Bigby River comes down into Mobile Bay. So we covered a lot of different waterways on that trip from Chicago to Mobile. It was 32 days from Chicago to Mobile, covered 1,141 nautical miles. We averaged about 35.5 miles per day of the days we were moving. 208 hours underway. We dropped the mast in Belmont. We re-stepped it at Mobile Yacht Club, which is a nice yacht club. They offered reciprocity to me there, and they didn't charge me a nickel to use their gin pole, which was awesome. I spent 12 nights at anchor with no power, which in November is really cold. And then I spent 20 nights on the dock with power, which was way more than I had intended. But there was just so many nights that I had to be on a dock so I could plug in and run the space heater to keep both myself and the dogs warm. We did spend 2 days not moving. One of them was to do boat projects at Green Turtle Bay and Kentucky Lake. My parents were visiting at the time, so we just kind of decided to spend a day there, hang out with them, get some boat projects done. And then I spent 1 day stop just because it was snowing and I wasn't going to stand outside in a blizzard on my boat like a crazy person. I had originally estimated it was going to take 24 to 28 days, so 32, not that far off. If you've done any boat trips in the past, you'll agree that like that's pretty good based off of an estimate. Honestly, the best part of that leg was I got to meet a ton of loopers. If you're not familiar, the Great Loop is an organization and a trip that you can take where you take your boat and basically do this section of the rivers, cut down through Florida, and then come back up the East Coast through the Erie Canal and through the Great Lakes, and essentially circle the entire eastern half of the United States by boat. About 150, 200 boats do it every year. You've got a little burgee that you fly when you do it, just like you have a Yacht Club burgee. And I met a lot of great people. I met people from Australia that were doing it. I met people from all over. It was really the highlight of that section of the trip, was meeting all these different loopers. The 24th of October, pretty simple process. This boat's got a deck step mast, so it's not that difficult. And then there we are, headed into Chicago Harbor Lock. I'll tell you, this going into the lock was very weird and emotional for me, because I was going into the lock, leaving Lake Michigan, which I had grown up sailing on my whole life, kind of wondering when I would be back to sail on Lake Michigan again. So this was pretty emotional for me when I was going into the lock here for the last time for who knows how long. And then coming down the Illinois River and the inland waterways, it was beautiful and scenic, and all the leaves were changing. If it wasn't for the cold, I would say this is the perfect time of year to do this trip. It was really spectacular almost the whole way down. My parents came and visited me in Kentucky Lake, which was a riot. There's my mom. She came through a lock with me, and then we went to some restaurant that had a bunch of Christmas decorations up, which was kind of nice in November. We got to do a little early family Christmas. Some of the locks through on these inland waterways have an elevation change of 80 or more feet, which is a big change from our locks that we do in Chicago with a 6 or 7 foot difference. We did get to see some fun points of interest along the way. There's the St. Louis Arch in downtown St. Louis. I will say, going through downtown St. Louis made me realize how, not that I didn't realize it before, but made me appreciate how blessed we are in Chicago to have the amazing waterfront that we do have. And then a question I got all the time was, well, what do you like? Are you alone the whole time? You're alone on your boat, but do you meet other people? So this was Thanksgiving dinner. We had 4 boats that we rafted up. All of them were loopers. And everybody made something different. We had a full turkey that someone cooked in their oven. We had mashed potatoes, gravy, stuffing, green bean casserole, deviled eggs, you name it. And then sitting at that table, we've got people from all over the US and the world. Actually, we had a couple from Australia there. We had a couple from North Carolina. We had another couple, I think they were from Maine, and then myself. So it was really fun. These are people I had never met before. We met along the way and traveling a few days together. We had just kind of gotten to know each other over the radio. And we decided to put together a little Thanksgiving dinner, and it was really an absolute riot. And then just like days on land, you have good days and you have bad days, though I'd argue that any day on the water is better than even a bad day on the water is better than a terrible day on land. On the left, I happened to accidentally wrap my prop in the Tom Bigby waterway with my dinghy painter coming out of a lock, which was awful. Though if you have boated long enough, you have run aground or you have wrapped your prop, and anybody who tells you that they haven't is lying. So unfortunately for me, my first scuba diving adventure of this trip was in the Tennessee Tom Bigby waterway, which is about as much fun as diving in the Chicago River. So that was not great. But like I said, not the end of the world. We were able to free it and get moving again. And then the picture on the right was Mobile Bay after stepping the mast and getting the sails up for the first time in over a month. And I actually remember texting my best friend Nick and telling him I was crying tears of joy as I put the sails up because I was so excited to be sailing again. So like any trip, you've got the high points and the low points. And then once we got to Mobile and we got the mast up, we left Mobile. We traveled along the ICW, which, if you don't know, there's actually a series of man-made canals, rivers, and protected waterways that runs all the way pretty much from Corpus Christi to New Jersey. It's called the Intracoastal Waterway. It's how a lot of the freight moves along the coastline. And it makes it possible to travel even on days where the ocean's too rough. So we were able to travel along the ICW from Mobile all the way to Apalachicola, Florida, which is kind of where this little line is here, if you can see my mouse on the screen. And from there, we jumped across the Gulf of Mexico down to Tampa. We did that in about 35 hours, sailed overnight. It felt great to be back out on open water. It felt great to be sailing again. It felt great to look up at the stars and see the Milky Way. If you've never been on a boat in a remote area or the middle of Lake Michigan at night, on a clear night, you'll see more stars than you've ever seen in your entire life, and it will make you fully appreciate how lucky you are to be alive and in that exact moment at that period in time. It really is something spectacular. Since leaving Mobile, we traveled an average of 50 miles per day of the days we were traveling, so a lot more than we did on the rivers. We spent 135 hours underway, and I actually stopped and spent some time in a couple different places, unlike the rivers where we got up and moved every day. Spent some time in Longboat Key off Sarasota, spent about a week in Sarasota, almost 2 weeks in Key West. I actually had 2 different friends come down and visit over New Year's weekend. And then I spent over a month in Marathon, Florida, which is a great place if you're trying to get ready to go cruising. It's a very convenient, well-protected harbor. It's accessible. There's a Home Depot, there's a West Marine, but it's easy to get stuck in that place. So it's been a little bit of a slower pace after we kind of got out of the inland rivers and onto the ocean and the bigger waterways here. One of the questions I know I had a couple people ask about before the seminar, so I'll kind of answer it now, is sailing to a different country. What do you have to do? So for here, this trip to the Bahamas, we are currently in the Bahamas. I'm in Bimini right now. We had to cross the Gulf Stream, which can present some interesting weather challenges. Not that we're not used to weather challenges on Lake Michigan, but we basically have this anywhere from 3 to 5 knot current that's constantly moving from south to north along the coast of Florida. And with the winds and the weather, that can add some interesting dynamics to it. Once you get to the Bahamas, you just go to customs. You can actually do all your cruising permits and everything online before you get here, which makes it very fast and efficient. For a 34-foot and under boat, which thank God I bought a 34-foot boat, it's $150 for 3 months. If you're larger than 34 feet, then it's $300 for 3 months. You can actually stay up to a year, and I think it's like $600 or $700 for a year for that size boat. As you're coming into a foreign country, not just the Bahamas, but any foreign country, you fly what we call a Q flag, which is that yellow flag that's on the table here. That basically signifies that you are entering the country from a different port. It's a quarantine flag, and you have not cleared customs yet until the captain gets off the boat, takes the passports of those on board, in which case just me, into shore and clears customs. You have to fly that flag. Once you clear your customs of whatever country you're in, you then lower your Q flag and you fly what we call a courtesy flag, which is this flag here on the bottom. This is the Bahamas courtesy flag. And this basically tells the local authorities and other folks that you have fees and you understand that you are in a foreign country, not the country that your vessel's flagged in, and you're going to abide by those rules and regulations. Starting in the U.S., actually pretty simple. If you're a U.S. citizen, you can download an app. I think it's called the Roam app, and you can just clear customs on your phone. Usually they'll FaceTime you, have you like kind of pan your phone around the boat, show who is with you, passports, all that fun stuff. And then you can actually just clear customs on your phone, which is pretty great. Yeah. So where are we now? We are in North Bimini, which is the westernmost island of the Bahamas. It's about 70 miles off Florida, if I remember correctly. I think my course yesterday was 83 miles total from Key Largo. We're waiting for a weather window, which looks like it might happen Monday, and then we're going to start working our way to the Exumas, which is going to be a 3-day sail with some stops in between. And there will be a link at the end of this presentation that you can scan with your phone if you want to follow along on our live tracker. So highlights of the trip so far and highlights of going cruising in general. Number one, I'd have to say, is meeting people. I'm a pretty social guy by nature, so I love to meet people. The loopers all along the inland waterways were fantastic. It was literally like having a built-in friend group that you could leave Chicago on your boat, not knowing anybody else that's traveling. And after a week, you'll have a whole new group of friends that you'll be traveling with. And you meet new people every day because some people decide to stick around and stay. Some people travel a little bit faster. So that having that looper community was really awesome for the start of this trip, especially leaving Chicago in October, not feeling like I was alone. On the inland rivers, you meet a lot of fun people along the way, as you can imagine. And then other cruisers that you meet along the way are part of the fun. You meet lots of other sailors. I'd say that since COVID became a thing and working remote is now not as taboo as it used to be, I've probably met a lot more younger cruisers that are my age, I'm 30 for reference, than I probably would have met in 2017 or 2018. So that's been really a lot of fun. Avoiding winter, though it sounds like winter hasn't been that awful up in Chicago this year. That's been a real treat. It's currently 82 degrees here. I'm wearing shorts and a short sleeve shirt. So if it's snowy back home in Chicago, I'm sorry. The only ice down here is what's in my ice box. Getting this far has been quite the accomplishment. When I pulled into the Bahamas yesterday, it felt like we had kind of accomplished what we had set out to achieve. We've done some fun diving along the way, but it's only going to get better as now that we're in the Bahamas. There's all sorts of different shipwrecks and plane wrecks and coral reefs and stuff to discover. And then actually a real highlight for me of this trip that I hadn't expected was documenting it and sharing it with everybody. I never really considered myself to be much of a writer. I wouldn't say that I particularly enjoyed writing before this, but just having that, especially in the inland rivers, of every day having that routine of writing an update and posting some photos, again, primarily so I'd have something to go back and look at when I move on from this trip. It's really been a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed writing, and it's helped me reflect on this journey and both just the journey that I've taken to get here in life in general. So what have I learned along the way that I can share with all of you wannabe cruisers that are out there? The hardest part easily is casting off the lines. The hardest part of this entire process of going from Chicago to Bimini, the hardest part of it was actually untying the lines and leaving. I left October 25th. I think I had planned on leaving 2 days earlier, but the weather wasn't quite right. And I probably could have left earlier, but I kind of kept coming up with reasons why I can't quite leave yet. And for me, setting that departure date was key. If I hadn't said I was leaving the end of October, I probably would have gotten October and been like, I'm not quite ready. Maybe I'll stay another year. So that's an essential part of this. The other thing that I found was essential for making this actually happen once I decided I wanted to do it was telling people I was going cruising. As I told more and more people, I kind of locked myself in more and more that I was going to go do this trip, because I can't tell everybody I'm going to go cruising and then stick around Chicago another year. So if you want to hold yourself to it, just start telling people you're going to go cruising. My other advice would be don't leave Chicago at the end of October, leave at the beginning of October at the latest. We spent a lot of really cold days motoring down the inland waterways. It was beautiful with the leaves, but I was literally wearing every item of clothing I had on the boat, just trying to stay warm. And as you're getting ready, and I'm certainly guilty of this is why I spent over a month in Marathon, is there's always a reason to stay put. There's always another project you can finish or an upgrade you want to do. The boat will never be perfect. The boat will never be totally ready. You just have to go, and some of those things you'll do along the way. I'd wanted to do lithium batteries and solar. I didn't have lithium batteries or solar when I left Chicago. I just figured that I would order it along the way and install along the way, which I did. That's part of the reason I spent so much time on was getting the lithium battery done, upgrading all of the wiring in the boat, the chargers, the electronics, everything, so that I could handle that new power source, which has been great. And if you don't have lithium on your boat, I highly suggest you do it. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Another question I get all the time is, what's it like cruising solo? What's it like doing this alone? Do you get lonely? Is it kind of sad being alone all the time? Personally, I don't tend to feel sad that I'm alone. We certainly all have our good days and our bad days. It's the same whether you live on land or on a boat. There's days where I wake up and I lay in my bunk and think, like, why did I do this? I should be back in Chicago. And usually by about 10 o'clock, those thoughts go away. Solo cruising is certainly freeing. You don't have to abide to anybody else's wishes or wants, but it definitely has its challenges. One of the things I do appreciate about solo sailing, actually, there's two things I guess I'll say. Two things I appreciate about solo sailing is, number one is you are totally reliant on yourself. So you have to know how every system on that boat works. You have to know how to handle that boat by yourself, how to bring it into a dock by yourself, how to anchor, how to pick up anchor, which frankly just makes you a better mariner. If you have crew, all those tasks are a lot easier. But if you can do all those things by yourself, it really means that you just have a better understanding of your boat, how it moves through the water, how to handle stuff. The other thing I really appreciated is that when I go on a long passage, I know what my limits are. I know what my tolerances are for sea condition, for wind, for safety. I know that I don't get seasick. I've been seasick once in my entire life, knock on wood. So when I'm doing a crossing like yesterday, where maybe if I had some family on board with me or some friends, I would be a little bit concerned for their comfort. Certainly that was something that happened on our sail from Fort Myers to Key West. That was about a 24-hour sail, about 150 miles. We lost the autopilot 3 hours into it. So I had to, oh no, less than that. We lost the autopilot about an hour into it. And so I had to hand steer the whole way from Fort Myers to Key West in some pretty big following seas. And honestly, my concern the whole time wasn't myself or the boat. My concern was my friend that had come to crew. This was his vacation for winter. And it was during that cold snap in Florida. So he left Chicago to spend some time in sunny Florida. We wore parkas the whole time. And then we spent 24 hours getting our asses handed to us by Mother Nature. So it wasn't probably the best vacation for him. And for me, I was more worried about him having fun than I was worried about the boat or myself or anything like that. So when you are by yourself, it is kind of nice that you don't have to worry about the comfort of anybody else because you're just sailing by yourself. My stereo is always on. If you know me, you know I listen to music all the time. That certainly helps with, keeping your mind active, and not feeling alone. It is important that you take care of yourself, both physically and very importantly, mentally, when you're spending this much time alone. If you've never done a long trip like this, your mental health is something that you need to take care of, regardless of what your life situation is, whether you live in a city or you live on a boat. But certainly it's amplified when you live on a boat. One of the ways I take care of myself mentally is I maintain regular contact with friends and family. Any of my friends sitting in the room there will tell you that I talk to them all day long, probably more than they want me to. But that's part of how I stay connected to the people back home and feel like I'm still part of that community. If you've spent some time in the Keys or you spent some time cruising, you've probably heard of Keys disease, which I always describe as falling into a rum bottle, and then you wake up and 10 years are gone and you don't know what you did. Which is one of the reasons I didn't do this trip when I was younger. I had a lot of friends that moved to the Caribbean and worked as charter captains in their early 20s, and I never did it because I was always afraid that I'd wake up one day, I'd be 31, and I'd look around and realize I've spent 10 years being a salty boat captain. So when I turned 30 and I realized that wasn't going to happen, that's when I decided to do this trip. But the first leg of this trip is pretty easy. Coming down the rivers, you got to move every day, stay ahead of the weather. There's not that much to see and stay and do. Once you hit Florida, there's definitely, you could spend a week here or a week there. And once you get to the Keys, there's definitely this kind of like, for lack of a better term, Jimmy Buffett 5 o'clock somewhere kind of mentality of, it's always a party, it's always happy hour. And I spent 2 weeks in Key West, and I can tell you that by the end of that 2 weeks in Key West, I had to leave. I felt this pressure to constantly go out, both with friends I had met there and other cruisers, which was not typically how I live my life on a boat. It was a little bit overwhelming almost after spending a month basically by myself, coming down the rivers and traveling every day. So I definitely started to feel it. And I remember feeling the day before I left Key West was definitely depressed and was in a funky mood. And then getting out on the ocean, putting the sails up, it was just like this wave of like positivity and the sense of adventure kind of came back, I guess I would say, and realizing that you're leaving to go see something new. It can be hard to leave, just like I said, when you leave Chicago or you leave your home port, you have to set that date to leave. When you get to a destination and you get comfortable and you start making friends, you don't want to leave. I know what this anchorage is like. I know where the dinghy dock is. I know where the grocery store is. It's hard to convince yourself to, pick up anchor and go move to another spot now that you've gotten comfortable and you've found a sense of community there. And certainly Marathon, Florida, Boot Key Harbor, where I just left from, is known for that. In fact, that place is known as Sticky Bottom because a lot of people come through when they're cruising and they find a sense of community. It's an easy way of life there, and they end up never leaving. So for me, I've just kind of in the back of my head, I always try and set a date when I get somewhere of, I'm going to spend 2 weeks here, I'm going to spend a month here, but then I'm going to leave by this date to keep myself kind of on track. And it was exactly true when I left Marathon. I was kind of apprehensive leaving. I'm going to go to a different country. I don't know what the anchorage is going to be like. I don't know if it's going to be protected in the storm. And then as soon as I get out of the harbor and you set the sails, that sense of adventure and that optimism and that realization that, that's one chapter and that's done. We're about to start a whole new chapter, a series of chapters in the Bahamas, and it's going to be awesome. So I found, for me personally, you've got to just kind of keep moving. You can't stay in one place too long. Otherwise you kind of get sucked into it. Along with that, boat projects never end. There's a picture of some fuel filters I changed in, I think that was Longboat Key. No matter how well you take care of your boat or how new it is, stuff will always break. Anybody that owns a boat is probably sitting in the audience chuckling, laughing at that because they know it's true. You'll always have a list of upgrades or fixes. I've probably got a list of 10 items right now on my chart table that I want to kind of knock out tomorrow before I go to the Exumas. But along with that, having a good basic skill set of problem solving, mechanical ability, even some electrical skills will make your life on the water so much easier. If those are things that you don't know how to do now and you do want to go cruising, look around. There's some great classes in Chicago. I know at Chicago Sailing we used to teach some of those classes, and obviously we don't now, but I would love to see maybe if the Nautical Education Committee wants to pick up kind of where that gap has been, I'd be happy to help out with that. But having some basic skills that you can maintain your boat and fix stuff without having to call a mechanic all the time makes a huge difference out here on the water. And then the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, is absolutely true. Even on the way from Marathon to Rodriguez Key, which is where we stopped on our way here to Bimini, I had changed all my fuel filters before I left. I did an oil change. I changed my impeller. The boat I was traveling with as a buddy boat didn't change their fuel filter. And about 3 hours into the very lumpy trip, their engine stalled out and they had clogged filters. So it's critical that before you go on a trip or before you take a jump across a large body of water, you kind of inspect everything. Filters are cheap. You're looking at about $20 in fuel filters in that bag, which is worth a lot more than having my engine die and being stuck and having to call for help. Hosting visitors, talked a little bit about this already, but planning visitors to come see you can be kind of complicated with weather and cruising and everything that goes into it. I'd originally planned on being in Bimini by middle of January. It's February 18th and I got here yesterday. So you never kind of know what's really going to happen. So when folks want to come visit you, it's best if you can make those plans as close to the time that they are going to visit as possible, just because you never know really where exactly you're going to be until you get there. And also having visitors definitely requires you to change your routine, whether that's where you anchor or, having people on the boat. I can tell you that after spending a month alone on the boat, having 2 friends visit me in Key West was a little bit of an adjustment, having to cater to other people's wants and needs. And they were both excellent. I'm glad they came, but it definitely was, by the time they left, I was ready to get back into my routine of just me again. And with that, we'll kind of roll into the next section here. Seems like we're doing okay on time here. Is it the cruising life for you? So I imagine if you're in this seminar, it's because you either are thinking about going cruising and you it's been a dream, kind of something to do maybe 10 years from now, or you're getting close to the idea of going cruising, or this is just I am a circus freak and you want to know why it is I live on the water, so you're here to learn about it. So we'll talk about is the cruising life for you. Just like anything in life, there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's a lot of different ways to live in Chicago. There's a lot of different ways to go cruising on a boat. I would say I tend to be more on the left-hand side of the screen, which is my boat's definitely not bare bones, but I don't have a washing machine. I don't have air conditioning. I don't have, maybe some of the creature comforts you have at home. I certainly have a nice, big, comfortable bed, got ample fridge and food storage. I've got Starlink, thanks to our good friend Kurt Lench. I don't know if Kurt's in the room or not. This is actually his Starlink unit that he loaned me for this trip. So I wouldn't say it's quite like camping, but cruising on a boat is pretty similar to camping. So my first question on this next slide is, how do you feel about camping? How do you feel about spending a weekend on your boat? You currently have a boat in Chicago. Do you think you could spend a week on it in the marina and enjoy it and enjoy a little bit of a more minimal lifestyle? If you want to go cruising, and this has kind of been an idea that's been rolling around in the back of your head, or you're like me, you spent almost a decade watching like Delos and Gone with the Winds and La Vagabond on YouTube and seeing these people live this lifestyle, and having it kind of draw you to it. Try cruising on the Great Lakes. There's no shortage of great spots that you can go spend a weekend on Lake Michigan or beyond. Saugatuck is a quick 80-mile sail across the lake, quick, 12, 14 hours, but you can do it overnight, spend a weekend there and kind of get a little taste of what the cruising life is like. Going up to the North Channel in Lake Huron, which is actually where this picture on the right is taken, is a great way to go do a little extended cruising that's still not too far from home. The North Channel is very remote. It's very similar to what you'd find down here in, say, the Exumas, where you have lots of islands that either are very sparsely populated or not populated at all, that groceries and help and stuff like that is kind of a long ways away, and you can kind of see if that remoteness is for you. If you want to try it in a warmer spot, charter a boat for a week with some friends and family. Honestly, the hardest part about chartering a boat somewhere warm is finding the right group of people to come with you. Anybody who's heard me talk about my annual BVI trip where I'd go down with friends, will tell you that the list of people that got invited on that trip was very selective, because these were people I knew that I was going to spend a week on a boat with. And not only was I going to spend a week with them, but everybody else was. I had to know that we were all going to get along well. The U.S. Virgin Islands, or the British Virgin Islands, is a great place to do that. Bahamas, Grenada. If you want to do that, but you don't have maybe the experience, or you're not quite comfortable, which is smart. Being afraid of something is smart typically. Do a cruising class. There's a lot of great sailing schools down there that you can spend a week with a captain on the boat, and they'll teach you kind of the ins and outs of going to a new anchorage you haven't been to before, or reading charts, or dealing with some of the stuff we don't deal with in the Great Lakes, like tides and currents. And then on top of that, figuring out, if you want to go cruising, what is the right boat for you? Is it the boat you have right now? Is it something different? How many creature comforts do you want? And then just having a clear head and recognizing that this lifestyle is not all sunsets and rum drinks. I've already mentioned that there's been days where I woke up and was like, why the hell am I doing this? That's absolutely true. But there are going to be days where you're weathered into a port and it's not fun, or you're stuck in an anchorage that isn't as protected as you thought and it's uncomfortable, or something breaks and now you have to figure out how to fix it. But for me, dealing with those challenges just makes that next great day that much better. It just makes it that much more enjoyable because you conquered whatever that problem was. Adapting to life on a boat, definitely a different lifestyle than we are on shore. This is a 34-foot sailboat. I would say I don't know, all included, the deck and the cabin, probably 300 square feet or less, probably less than that, of living space. It's certainly plenty for me. It would probably be enough for me and a significant other or a spouse. But when you start adding friends and stuff, that's way too small. But adapting to life on a boat is not only just dealing with the boat itself, but it's adapting to having your life kind of controlled by the weather. I mean, in Chicago, we're all used to having the weather dictate what clothing we wear. But here on a boat, the weather dictates your life. It dictates whether you're going to go to another anchorage today, or if you're looking at the forecast for the next couple of days, it tells you that you have to leave today so you can get to a place that's going to be better sheltered when the wind switches 180. You have limited water. It's not like back home where you can open the tap and let the sink run while you brush your teeth, which I hope none of you do. I carry 80 gallons of water on this boat, which based on my experiences has proven to last me about 2.5 weeks between myself and the dogs. But as soon as you start adding people to that water supply diminishes very quickly. You have limited power. I've spent a great deal of effort and money putting lithium batteries. I got about 400 amp hours of lithium batteries on this boat, and a bunch of solar. And right now, this conversation that I'm having with you is being powered by my lithium batteries, an inverter, and some solar panels. So the solar helps keep up with my use for energy. I also have a big alternator on the engine that can charge those batteries quickly. But yeah, limited power. It's not like you can just go home, plug in your hair dryer and run your hair dryer. You have to kind of think about how much power am I using every day. If it's a couple cloudy days in a row, you probably have to run your generator a little, or your engine a little bit more, which burns more fuel, which if you're on a remote island is a consideration. So my power usage, while I wouldn't say I feel like I'm limited in what I can use, it's definitely, you think about it a little bit more than you would if you were, say, at home. Your dinghy, your little small inflatable boat with an outboard, that is effectively your car when you're cruising. I remember talking to a friend when I was getting ready to go, saying that how I really wanted the bigger dinghy, but I couldn't fit on the boat, and I wanted the 15 horsepower motor. And they kind of laughed and were like, "Why?" And it's because it is your car. There are anchorages where I'm only 500 feet from the dinghy dock. There are anchorages like today here, I'm anchored about 1.5 miles from the customs dock. So I have to ride my dinghy 1.5 miles each way to get into town, to get to the customs dock to clear customs, which wasn't a big deal. But it would have been nice to have a little bit bigger dinghy, so I could have gone a little bit faster. Sleeping on anchor. If you've ever anchored in the playpen and you've watched all these hanyakkers drift around and collide with each other, being on anchor is probably something that's never very settling and easy. There's certainly less knuckleheads down here, but you have to make sure that when you go to bed that your anchor is set. And that means it's set for even if the wind switches or the current switches 180, and now you've spun around in a completely different direction. Key West, I actually had a guy anchor near me. I went over and told him I thought he was a little bit too close. He told me that I was just being a difficult American and I didn't know what I was talking about. And then the next day he hit my boat and he wasn't even there. So you have to make sure that when you're anchored, you are paying attention to both the weather, the tides, the currents, and other people around you, and setting your anchor so that it's going to hold and you're going to feel comfortable sleeping on it. I have no problem sleeping on anchor because I trust my own abilities and skills. But you can set an anchor alarm. You can set all sorts of different stuff to help you with that. Seasick guests, if you have people come visit, they might get seasick. They're not used to living on a boat and the motions of being down below. I can tell you that yesterday I would have had some seasick guests crossing the Gulf Stream. And then just on top of that, living in a small space and downsizing your life, downsizing your clothes, downsizing your tool collection. For me, that was the hardest thing. Downsizing, the stuff that you take with, and kind of realizing that when we live on land and we have a big apartment or a big house, we kind of accumulate all this stuff. Just before this talk, I was talking to my family and they were kind of reorganizing some stuff in the basement, and I kind of chuckled and made a joke about how, like, well, we don't have to change our Christmas decorations or our winter decorations for spring decorations on a boat because we don't have the space and it's always the same season. So it's an adjustment of kind of realizing that you don't need all this stuff that we've been trained to think that we need in our lives on land. And then planning versus reality. Planning a trip like this, the more planning you can do, the better. Certainly, plans will change on the water. That is a truth of living on the water. But being able to adapt to that change because you've well researched what your plan is makes it that much easier. Coming down the inland rivers, that was probably the part of this that I was most concerned about. Wasn't really concerned about the Gulf, wasn't concerned about Florida, wasn't concerned about the Bahamas, but coming down the inland rivers was just something that I wasn't familiar with, those waterways. So I bought some guidebooks, including this one here on the right, and it was great. I mean, they basically gave me a day by day. You're going to go from this harbor, you're going to go to this harbor. It's this many miles at 6 knots. It'll take you this long. This is what amenities there are. This is where you can find a grocery store. So all that stuff that you don't really think about when you're at home. Like I lived in Chicago for 10 years. I never had to think about where I was going to go get groceries. But when you're traveling on the water and you're traveling through sometimes big towns, sometimes really, really small towns, these are considerations. Certainly coming down the rivers, there were spots where I have to go grocery shopping here because for the next 4 days, I'm either anchored out in the middle of nowhere or I am in a town that's very small and not going to have much in the way of resources. So planning ahead, buying cruisers guides. I've got a whole bookshelf full of them here of the Bahamas and the Caribbean and all sorts of different places. And before I ever go anywhere on this trip, I crack open the book to where I'm going to go next. I kind of read through and see what's going to be there. Any like words of wisdom, avoid this area, anchor here. That has been huge. And then just kind of some basic questions that I get along the way. This is a picture of my typical workday on the boat. I've got my laptop, I've got my internet turned on, I've got a TV that I can live stream TV with Hulu. So typical morning for me isn't that untypical for a lot of you that work at home. I've got my Starbucks coffee, I've got my internet, I'm watching CNBC, and that's how I typically start my day, which if you're at home, it's probably not that different how you start your day. Some basic questions of like, where do I stay at night? It's either anchored in a marina. I try and spend as much time anchored out as possible because staying in a marina adds up quick. A lot of the marinas in Florida here are anywhere from $3 to $6 a foot. So 34 feet, that adds up. And then you do that for multiple days in a row. That becomes a big number really quick. Working from the boat, I haven't really found it to be that different than working at home. Having a good, strong internet connection, which thanks to services like Starlink, make it extremely easy and affordable. I think Starlink is about $120, $140 a month. And it gives me unlimited high-speed internet. How I'm talking to all of you right now. And then getting off the boat daily when possible helps just kind of keep your mind fresh and keeps you fresh. When I was in Sarasota or Marathon, I got off and tried to work from a Starbucks or a coffee shop every day just to kind of break up the routine. So for the most part, my days aren't all that different than what you would do on land. Kind of work during the day, Monday through Friday. In the evenings, maybe I meet up with some friends and go to a restaurant. On the weekends, we'd plan some kind of activity, whether it was kickball or scuba diving or, a happy hour at the marina. So life on the water doesn't really have to be that different than your daily life on land. So if you're going to go cruising, you've got your plan, you've got it all figured out. Now you got to figure out what you want for a boat, which is a huge question. Do you want a sailboat? Do you want a powerboat? Do you want a monohull? Do you want a catamaran? How big does it need to be? What type of rig do you want? Do you want a sloop? Do you want a ketch? Do you want, separate heads for each cabin? Do you want a shared head? How big of a salon do you need? Does it need to have a water maker so you can turn salt water into fresh drinking water? How much solar do you need to support your electrical needs? Do you want lithium batteries? I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And frankly, the biggest part that determines the answer to these questions is your budget. If you're buying a boat and your budget is $100,000, I would say plan on spending at least 20% of that budget on upgrades and repairs after you buy the boat. So if your budget's $100,000, don't spend $100,000 on the boat. Spend like 75 or maybe 80 because you're going to find stuff that you want to change along the way. and it's going to be expensive, especially if you're not able to do a lot of that work yourself. And just some skills that help while you're cruising. If you're new to sailing, I can't recommend taking a sailing course enough. One of my big gripes with all these YouTube channels out there, and I've met a lot of people along the way that do this, is they see these people sailing on YouTube. They want to go sailing, so they buy a boat. They know nothing about boating. They've never been on a boat before, which is great. I love seeing the sport grow. But you got to take a proper class, or you've got to learn from somebody who knows what they're doing, because there's just so much you don't know when it comes to being on the water. Every day that I go sailing out here, I learn something new. I've been sailing my whole life. I've been teaching sailing for over 10 years. I've been a professional captain. I've sailed all over this half of the world. I still learn something new every time I go sailing. Being able to work on your engine and deal with some mechanical stuff on your own, that is huge. A lot of places will offer like kind of a weekend class on sailboat diesel engines. I used to teach one. I can tell you that a lot of the stuff I used to teach in that class, I have applied to both this boat and other people's boats along the way. So if you can take one of those classes, if there's one available, I can't recommend them enough. Same thing with electrical skills. You got to have a multimeter, a wire stripper, crimper, and some tools in the boat, so that you can fix stuff along the way. You'd be surprised how many people I met on this trip that don't either know how to swim or don't like to swim. I can imagine living on a boat and being afraid of falling off the edge, knowing that you can't swim. So if you're going to go cruising, definitely know how to swim. If you are not a certified diver, I would suggest getting your dive certification before you go, because not only is it helpful with boat maintenance, you get to experience literally a whole different part of the world that you can't experience breathing the air around us. I've never met anybody that's gone and gotten their dive certification and then later was like, meh, wasn't great. Everybody I've ever met that's gotten their diving certification has said, this is the coolest thing I've ever done. And I feel that every time I put my mask on and go underwater. Having some basic understanding of weather, how weather patterns move. Us Chicago boaters are used to knowing that weather comes from the west, it goes to the east, and kind of how our weather patterns move around Chicago. Being able to look at stuff like predict wind and understanding how local weather patterns work is huge. And then something that's I think often overlooked is having a good solid base of first aid, and understanding how to deal with issues like that as they arise. I've got a huge first aid kit here on the boat. I've done a lot of different first aid training throughout the years, whether it was when I was a kid with Boy Scouts or through scuba diving and being a rescue diver and all sorts of other stuff. And I've probably offered first aid help more than I would care to admit. Any of my friends will tell you that I probably call 911 more than any of them do, because I tend to find myself in those situations, not with me, but with people around me. So having a good solid first aid kit and being able to respond calmly to a situation is huge, especially when you're out cruising in areas where help may be several hours or a day or days away. And now we'll get to kind of the fun part that everybody loves to ask me about. Let's talk about spending money on this trip and like how much does it actually cost to go cruising. I remember when I was telling people I was going to go cruising, a lot of them looked at me confused because they're like, you're 30, you're not retired, you know, you're not the highest earning person I know. How is it you're affording to go on this trip? Well, the reality is that cruising can be as expensive or as cheap as you want it to be. A big dictator of that is whether you spend nights at anchor or in marinas, or if you sail versus a powerboat. I can tell you that I certainly burn a lot less fuel as a sailboat than I would as any of my powerboating friends would doing this trip. I meant to pull the number of how many gallons I burned on the inland rivers, and I forgot to do it, but it was very low. It was extremely low. If you have a lot of solar and lithium batteries, that's even less that you're running the engine, which means even less diesel you're burning. And then how much do you dine in versus dine out? I would say my food budget versus Chicago, while buying food and provisioning is probably more expensive here, I probably spend less in a month on food and beverage here than I did in Chicago, because I wasn't going out to restaurants. I wasn't ordering Uber Eats. I wasn't doing Grubhub. I wasn't doing all the things that we do in the city because it's convenient and we don't care. Boat maintenance, being preventative with your boat maintenance and having spares on hand will definitely save you some money. I can't tell you how many filters I've sold to people along the way, because I bought a bunch of filters and I was able to charge 3 or 4 times what I would have paid on Amazon, but we're in the middle of nowhere and Amazon doesn't deliver here. So being prepared will help you actually save money in the long run. And then just a cost comparison of cruising 1 month of living in Chicago versus my first month cruising, which was coming down the rivers, which was the most fuel I was ever going to burn on this trip because the mast was down and I had to motor every single day. And I stayed in marinas more than I've stayed since I got to Florida. My rent in Chicago when I was living there was $1,450 a month. And in 31 days of motoring from Chicago to Mobile, this includes diesel and dockage, I spent $1,452. So I spent $2 more to spend a month traveling on my boat than I would if I stayed in Chicago. My insurance on my boat versus a car is pretty comparable. Food and everything, like I said, I actually did the numbers. It worked out to be a little bit less than what I would have spent in Chicago, just because I wasn't dining out and eating out as much. So you actually can live this life probably on the salary or the income that you have now. You might have to adjust your comfort level a little bit, but it is doable. And let's talk about making money while you're cruising. Working remote just kind of gets easier and easier, it seems like, as the years go on. It's certainly much less taboo than it used to be. And now with things like Starlink and better cellular coverage everywhere, you can do it even easier. I'm talking to you guys on Starlink. I've mentioned that already. I'm looking at my phone. I've got 4 bars of 5G here in the Bahamas. So you can work remote if your job is flexible. You can do that. Finding a remote job is now actually even easier than it ever has been in the past. And then for me, because I have a set of mechanical skills and electrical skills and general boat skills, I'm able to kind of monetize that along the way. I've done a bunch of diesel engine repairs on boats along the way. I've done some bottom cleaning. I haven't done any boat detailing, but I've met people that do that. In Marathon, it got to the point where I had so many people asking me for help with boats that I had a waiting list of diesel engine repair stuff. So if you're able to learn some skills, you can really monetize those along the way and set yourself up for making some extra cash along the way. And then obviously some people do YouTube or Patreon, which looks like easy money, but as someone who hates editing YouTube videos, I can tell you that it's not easy money. It's hard work filming and storyboarding and coming up with those videos that you watch every week. And it's not for me. So I still have my regular career that in the motorsports world that I do. So yeah, so where do you start? If you're totally new to sailing, or if you've only done a little bit of racing, or you've only done a little bit of sailing with your family or friends in the past, where do you start? How do you get it started off on this lifestyle? I would say if you're new to sailing, the best thing you can do is take a U.S. sailing certified class, get your basic keelboat sailing certification. As someone who taught that class for years, I can tell you that it's the best way to learn the fundamentals of boating, how to learn it safely, how to learn it effectively. In that class, your instructor can teach you in 16 hours so much more effectively and so much more concisely than what you would learn if you spent a whole summer just sailing with friends, because they've learned how to explain things in a clear, concise manner in a way that makes sense to beginners. Chicago Yacht Club has programs, Columbia has programs, Jackson Park has programs, Corinthian has programs. I think the Park District has programs, I don't know, but do some research, look up in your local area where you can go sailing, and take a sailing class. It's really just the hands down the best way to learn how to sail. If you want to sharpen your skills after you've taken your class, do some racing. It's a great way to learn kind of more of the ins and outs of boat trim and boat speed and how to get going fast. There's a lot of great Wednesday night racing programs here in Chicago. CYC has a wonderful program on Tuesday nights called Crew U. It sells out every year. It's what this picture is in the right-hand corner. I think I see Rick Lilly and current rear Commodore Laura Sigmund in there somewhere in that photo. So it's a great program. I can't recommend that program enough. And then once you've done that, or if you are an experienced sailor, but you kind of want to learn a little bit more about cruising, U.S. Sailing has some great cruising courses, and you can take them in the Great Lakes. You can take them in the islands. There's all sorts of different places you can do that. So I definitely recommend taking a class, whether you're a beginner or you're an old salt. To learn, like I said, I learn something every day out here. And if you're lost kind of on this process and don't know where to start, just shoot me an email. I'm always happy to help people kind of get started in the world of sailing and cruising. It's been a wonderful thing for my life. If I look at my group of friends and what I've experienced in life, so much of my core group of friends, so much of my favorite experiences in life have come from boating. And it's just a great way to meet people. So what's next for me? We're almost done here. We're just hitting an hour right now. I'll be in the Bahamas till the end of April. I've had some developments with work that have been wonderful that are going to actually bring me back to Chicago for the summer. So the boat is going to go into hard storage in Florida for the summer. I'll be back in May, and then the plan is come winter, I will. There's a wind shift. You can't see it, but the boat's spinning like this right now on the anchor. And then I'll come back down next winter and do some more cruising. Hopefully, get a little bit farther into the Caribbean islands. So I'll leave this screen up while we go through the Q&A here. That QR code, if you scan it, will take you to like my spot tracker and stuff like that if you want to follow along. And then on the left, there's just some great resources along the way. Some of the cartoons I used in this were from the cruising cartoonist. That one that I mentioned at the very beginning that kind of inspired me to start this trip, that was one of hers. If you're interested at all in learning how to scuba dive, unpaid promotion, Underwater Safaris on Lincoln Avenue is a great family-owned dive shop. They've been there for all of my dive needs, and I've taken all of my classes through them. If you want to charter a boat in the British Virgin Islands, there's a link to the broker that I use. She's excellent. It doesn't cost you a penny. In fact, you'll probably save money versus going directly through a charter company. Some info on the Great Loop. And then some info on the coral reefs that I mentioned kind of way back in the beginning. There's a great documentary on Netflix called Chasing Coral. If you haven't seen that, I would definitely take a look at that. And so with that, we're going to get into the Q&A part. So I guess we'll start with Jeff. If you're in the room and you have the microphone, why don't you go ahead and we will start with our questions.
Okay, thanks, Graham. First off, everybody here in the room, make some noise. Okay, all right, so questions for Graham. Okay, hold on, I'm moving around the room. Here.
Hi, Graham. It's Jack Day. I've
Hey,
got a
Jack.
question for you. Are you concerned about security, and do you have any guns on board?
Ooh, that's a great question. And that's a question that if you read any of the forums online, it's a very hotly debated topic. So as far as security goes, coming down the inland waterways and through Florida, no, was not concerned about security. Being in the islands, absolutely not concerned with security. When you come visit these islands, their whole economy is based on tourism and growing. So less cruise ships and even more and more cruisers like myself and other people as cruising becomes more popular with how accessible it's become. So they take any sort of theft or acts of criminality against cruisers very seriously. And it is not tolerated in these communities. So I felt very safe. Do I have a gun? No, I do not have a gun. In the Bahamas, you are allowed to bring a firearm in and a certain amount of ammunition. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. The firearm has to stay locked on the boat. You cannot take it off the boat, but you are able to bring a firearm here. Most countries you visit in the Caribbean, you are not allowed to bring a firearm. And you'll find that as you go around the world. Obviously in America, we've got very interesting debate surrounding firearms, and I won't get into that. In Chicago, I'm a gun owner. I do have several guns. I have my concealed carry permit in Illinois, but I can tell you after getting my concealed carry permit, I think I carried a gun on my person. I can probably count hand in all the years I had it. So it's not something I typically worry about. I can lock the boat if I'm going to leave it for any extended period of time. I've got dogs on board. That probably would help deter something. But it's mainly just being smart, paying attention to your surroundings. In an area like this where I'm in an anchorage with other boats, the first thing I do when I anchor is I try and go meet some of the other boats. So we get to know each other. And that way, if they see that my dinghy's gone, and they see someone who's very clearly not me come up to the boat, they'll, kind of wonder what's going on. So great question, but no, I do not carry guns and I do not typically worry about security.
Okay, as we get our next question, Graham, change your screen so we can get a good look at you.
Oh yeah, I will stop sharing.
All right. And here's your next question.
Hey, Graham, it's Pastor Dak, Harnack, and Chuck. How you doing? We got a question for you. Any interesting interactions with or advice with Coast Guard or customs within the BVI?
Sure. So Coast Guard coming down to the US, I didn't interact with them at all. I never got ported, or any local like waterway or DNR police. I never had any interactions with them. I know other people that did. It's all the typical, get boarded, you have your flares, you have your registration, life jackets, yada, yada, yada. I never heard of any unpleasant interactions. Here in the Bahamas, you have to clear customs when you come in. I did that this morning because I got here too late yesterday to do it. I have stories from other Caribbean islands I visited about customs and some ridiculous processes that I won't get into. But here in the Bahamas, I was actually very pleasantly surprised how easy it was. Since COVID, they transitioned to an online platform that you do all your paperwork on. You actually pay the fee before you even get here. So you've submitted everything to them before I even arrive, including the dog permits. When you're traveling with pets, that can be a whole additional hassle with having pets and vaccines. The Bahamas, if you do it directly through the health department or whatever department it is that deals with animals, it's a pain. You have to do it all paper, send it via snail mail with a money order, yada, yada, yada. There's actually a guy here in the Bahamas that I'm happy to share his info with anybody. If you want it, his name is Wellington. You basically send him all the paperwork and you Zelle him $60 per animal. And he goes, walks over to the office, fills everything out, gets the permits, scans it, emails it back to you. So when you're cruising, one of the hardest things is dealing with mail, right? So the idea of cruising and having to fill all this paperwork via mail, send it to the Bahamas, and then wait for them to mail it back to you would be kind of difficult most places. So there's services to get around that. I went through Wellington. I did my dog permits through that. He had them back to me in 7 days. They were approved, no problem. I submitted it all online. Was kind of expecting to have to answer some questions or stuff when I got to customs this morning. I literally walked in. The guy asked me for my like file or transaction number, punched it in the computer, hit print, went stamp, said, enjoy your stay in the Bahamas. So it was extremely painless. The entire process probably took me less than 5 minutes here today. So that's been easy. Other countries, it can vary. I've got some fun stories if you want to ask me about next time you see me at the bar. I'll be happy to tell them to you, but I won't bore everybody with them here.
Okay, here's the next question.
Hi, Graham. My name is Kyle Ewing. How do you handle scuba tanks and air for diving? Do you
Great
have a
question.
compressor on the boat, or do you rent? Or
Great question. I wanted to put a compressor on the boat. The reality is this is a 34-foot boat, and I genuinely cannot pack another item into this boat. It is so full of stuff. In fact, a lot of my dive gear actually lives on deck because I just don't have space for it down below. So if I had a bigger boat or certainly a catamaran, I would absolutely have a dive compressor, because for me, the coolest part about this lifestyle is being able to just jump off the back of your house and go look at the whole underwater world. So I carry 2 tanks. The reality is there's enough dive operations down here that you can get them filled pretty much anywhere. I've never paid more than $10 for a tank fill, which is what I paid back in Chicago. So it's not terribly convenient, but it's not that hard. But honestly, a lot of the diving you'll do down here is free diving. Do a lot of free diving, whether it's cleaning the boat. If you're fishing, like for lobster, one of the things I can't wait to go do this week is go catch some fresh lobster with my own 2 hands and then bring it up and cook it. Doesn't that sound nice? You can't use scuba equipment. If you're fishing, you can't spearfish in the Bahamas. Some other places you can. Or you can spearfish, but you can't use a spear gun here, I should say. Nothing with a trigger, if we're being technical. But you can't do it on a bottle. It has to be free diving. So it hasn't been too much of an issue. I will say I carry one of those little like pony bottles. It's called a spare air bottle. And I actually have it mounted right next to my helm, kind of as like if I catch a crab pot or some kind of underwater emergency, I can literally grab it and not have to go through the whole process of putting on your BC and all your scuba gear, and just basically dive in the water with this bottle. And I've used it a couple times, whether it was clearing something that fouled one of my water intakes, or cleaning the bottom real quick before I go somewhere. So I would say if you're interested in doing this and you like to dive, definitely have a spare air bottle on board. Then you can just fill those off of one of your big tanks.
Okay, Graham, I think we're okay on questions here. Oh, well, slow down. Got one more.
Actually, maybe, Graham, this is Chris Harnack. Maybe a couple. One,
Sure.
in terms of fuel, when you're dealing with gasoline versus diesel, and the challenges, if there's any around that. And then also, if you're going down the river, how far in advance do you have to make reservations for the places you're staying, or you just kind of show up and hope for the best?
Great question. So this boat's diesel. which is very economical. It's motoring at hull speed on this boat, which is about 6 knots, 6.5 knots, depending on the currents. I burn about a half a gallon an hour, which for a boat is very efficient. My boat holds 30 gallons in the built-in tanks. I carry an additional 20 gallons in jerry cans. When I was coming down the rivers, I actually carried 40 in jerry cans. Because coming down the rivers, marinas can be few and far between. The longest stretch that you should have to make on the rivers between fuel stops for gas or diesel is between essentially just south of St. Louis, a place called Hoppy's, all the way to Paducah, Kentucky, which a good segment of that you're going with the current of the Mississippi River, so that helps your economy. And then you turn to go up the Ohio, and now you're fighting a 2 or 3 knot current, which just kills your fuel economy. So you have to be able to make it. Off the top of my head, I think it was about 220 miles. About 100 of those miles were against the current. With the fuel you have on board. So a lot of loopers will carry jerry cans, especially gas powered boats, which tend to burn a little bit more. As far as getting fuel on the inland rivers or on the loop part of it, there's marinas every day. You can stop at a marina and get gas or diesel. That was never really an issue. I never ran into a spot where there wasn't gas or diesel. As far as making reservations to those marinas as you stopped, you could call a day or two in advance and make a reservation. I typically would call the morning of, once I knew I was going to kind of where I was going to end up. I never really cared if I got to stay in a marina or not, just because I was originally planning on anchoring out the whole time. But every marina I stayed at, they had ample space. As looping has become more and more popular, these marinas on the rivers have figured out that transient boats is a really good business, so they make sure that they have plenty of docks available. I'd say your transient boat rate on the rivers range anywhere from 75 cents a foot to the highest I think I paid is about $1.75 a foot. And I'm gonna just step away for a second because it started to rain and I have to close a hatch. But yeah, so gas and diesel easy to find, marinas easy to find. Price of marinas varies based on where you were. Like I said, the rivers was anywhere from 75 cents a foot to $1.75 a foot. Here in Florida, I've seen it as high as $6 a foot. So it just depends. We're here in the Bahamas, I should say. Any other questions in the room?
Okay, one more, Graham.
H dot
H
question.
dock, my homeland. Woo!
So is there any piece of equipment which you wish you would have brought along that you don't have? And what's been the biggest surprise you've had on the trip?
Great question. Piece of equipment that I wish I brought, but I didn't. Dive compressor. If you know me, you know I'm very handy and you know I have a lot of tools. And so this boat is packed to the gills with tools, to the point where I'm often loaning out tools to other boats around me. So I felt very proud of myself for how prepared I've been on that front. The only thing I really wish I had was a dive compressor. And then the biggest surprise of the trip, I'd say just meeting people along the way and meeting people that you didn't know you had connections with. I'm sitting here in an anchorage right now, and a boat comes up next to me and anchors next to me. And I zipped over there to talk to them and say hi. And they're like, "Oh, you're Graham. Like, we're good. We spent a bunch of time cruising with your cousins in the Bahamas." And we've had a lot of similar instances along the way. So just how small, it's a great big world out there, don't get me wrong, but how small of a world the cruising community is. That's been a big surprise and kind of a very exciting surprise for me. Is that the last question in the room?
It looks like it for now. I know you got a
Okay.
bunch online.
Looks like we've got 19 online, so we're gonna kind of run through these here. So the first one, that's not a compliment to my appearance, is what is your battery bank and solar setup like? How much power do you use? Water maker, fridge, etc. All right, so when I left Chicago, I just had 2 regular lead acid, like group 24 batteries. I wanted to do solar, I wanted to do lithium, but I had to kind of prioritize my list of how much time I had left in Chicago to get these projects done and how much money I wanted to spend at that point in time. And my thinking was coming down the rivers, I was going to be running the engine all day, every single day. So battery capacity wasn't a priority because I'd have that alternator turning and cranking out voltage. So I opted to just wait until I got to Florida to do the lithium and the bulk of the solar, which is what I did. Worked out great. The only thing I did before I left Chicago was I put on a larger Balmar 100 amp externally regulated alternator. Makes a huge difference. It'll put out up to 80 amps, which means that with an inverter and that alternator, that engine practically doubles as a generator. So I don't have to carry like an external generator or a built-in generator with the boat. That engine kind of doubles for that. Now, there are some cons to that. It means it's more hours on your engine, and any diesel mechanic will tell you the worst thing you can do to a diesel engine is just endlessly freewheel it in idle, in neutral, and use it to create power. But I am very conscious of that, and I balance that with actually working and putting load on the engine. So I carry about 400 amp hours of lithium, and not to get too deep into this to bore everyone, but if you've got 400 amp hours of a standard conventional lead acid wet cell, like what you think of a typical battery, if you have 400 amp hours of that type of battery, only 200 amp hours of that is usable. Once you go over 200 amp hours of consumption, it doesn't matter if you don't know what an amp hour is, just think of it as a pie at this point. If I eat more than 50% of that pie, I start damaging the battery and the capacity becomes less and less and less and less. With lithium, the batteries that I bought, they are rated for use capacity 100% of what they market them as. So they're probably really like a 220 amp hours cell. But I have 400 amp hours, whereas with the lead acids, I had 130 amp hours. So already a huge improvement in rated amp hours. But then when you factor in the fact that I can use all of that 400 amp hours, opposed to really about 70 of the amp hours of the lead acids, my battery capacity is massive now. So I can run an inverter, charging my laptop, running the Starlink, running the TV behind me, running my little Chicago Harbor Lighthouse nightlight, thanks Tim DeVore. And I can go for, I think I calculated almost 2.5 days with no solar, no engine, no nothing. I've got about 600 watts of solar on my Bimini that on a sunny day keeps up with and adds to my battery bank on a day like today where it's a little cloudy and raining. I'm not really putting much power in, but as long as tomorrow's sunny, it'll be fine. Worst case scenario, I run the engine for like 2-3 hours and it kind of gets me back up to where I need to be. So that's that. Next question. Describe the water filter you added. Is it a water maker or something different? It is not a water maker. Again, wanted a water maker. For those who don't know, a water maker or a desalinator takes ocean salt water, runs it through some high pressure membranes at like several thousand PSI, and it basically forces the salt water and other contaminants out, and it creates water you can drink, which is great because it means you don't have to worry about filling your tanks ever again. Again, limitations of a 34-foot boat and my personal budget. I wasn't able to afford or fit a water maker on this boat. And since it's just me and the dogs carrying 80 gallons in the tanks and a couple of spare gallon jugs, I wasn't too concerned about it. The filter I described earlier is a drinking water filter. It's just off Amazon. It's a typical 3-phase filter that you would put under your sink at home. It has a separate tap and it just plumbs right into my freshwater plumbing on the boat. So I filter the water before it goes in the tanks and I treat it. And then the water that I cook with or like brush my teeth with or wash dishes with comes out of the regular sink tap. And then I have a separate tap right next to that that is this filtered water. And if you taste it, it tastes like bottled water. You can't tell a difference. Joy Wilson asks, good to see you. Wondering why you decided to go down the rivers to the Gulf versus the Erie Canal or St. Lawrence Seaway. Great question. I have already gone from Jacksonville, Florida to Chicago on a boat. So I've already done the Erie Canal. I've done the East Coast. I haven't done the St. Lawrence Seaway, which I would love to do. But so I wasn't really interested in doing that leg. I kind of figured if I went down the inland rivers to Florida, that would complete my Great Loop. So technically, once I get back to Florida from the Bahamas, I will have completed my Great Loop. Along with that, just with the weather, the Erie Canal closes, I think, around October 1st, and I was going to be way too late to make that cutoff. And then I would be kind of coming down the eastern seaboard at the end of hurricane season and at the start of winter, which just seemed like there'd be a lot of opportunities for weather to play havoc. Or when you come down the inland waterways, it can be as windy as it wants. I'm on a river that's 500 feet wide. It's never really going to get that wavy. So it was just for weather wise, just kind of made more sense. That, and you have all the loopers coming with. So, I mean, I was with tons of other boaters. So if I had a problem, I knew there'd be other boaters around to help me. Anonymous asked, seems like you were younger than most other cruisers. Is that usually true? Have you met many young cruisers? I am. I would say the bulk of people that I hang out with are my parents' age. I've met some young cruisers along the way. There's actually a great organization called the Young Cruisers Association where you can kind of follow and meet other folks that are the similar age. Like I said, there's another couple right here in this Anchorage that I met today that's younger. I would say that as remote work and internet connectivity becomes better and better, you're going to find more and more young cruisers. Cruising by its very nature is a very social thing. So you naturally meet people everywhere you go. I met a couple in Marathon that I actually sailed over to the Bahamas with. We kind of buddy boated, and they also have an Irwin, and they are from Michigan, and they spend their winters down here in their boat. They put on the hard in Florida in the summer, and they go back to Michigan. So kind of a similar thing to what I'm planning on doing this year. Another question, how hard was Starlink to set up? Starlink, considering how advanced the technology is, it's about as easy as it gets. I mean, how you want to mount it on your boat is up to you, and how you want to run the wires, that's a different thing. But in terms of actually setting up the system, you plug it into a power outlet, it boots up, it's got motors in the dish, so it'll kind of look around in the sky and find the best angle, and that's it. That's all it takes. It's probably easier than setting up a Comcast modem. Rich Sheridan says, what are you doing for health insurance within and with outside the United States? Great question. I am self-employed, so I buy my health insurance through the marketplace. So I use the Affordable Care Act for health insurance. It does cover me outside of the US because I'm not going to be outside of the US for that long. If I was going to go spend a year cruising, I would start looking into some like expat health insurance. There's a lot of different options out there. And if you talk to anybody that has spent time cruising outside of the United States that's from the US, they will tell you about how amazing and how cheap the healthcare is they get anywhere outside of the US. So I love this country. It's a great country, but our healthcare system is a complete joke. And a lot of places you'll find you can get the same quality of healthcare for significantly less, and not have to deal with the insurance thing as much of an issue. Amy Schwartz asks, if you were to start over, is there anything you would have done differently? I would have left Chicago earlier. I would have left about a month earlier. I stayed because there was the wedding of a very close friend I wanted to attend, and I'm glad I did. But I would have left a month earlier. It was cold. It was really, I was never more jealous of somebody that owns a Grand Banks than when I was going down the Tennessee River in 29-degree weather, and I look over at them and they're inside their pilot house wearing a t-shirt and drinking a coffee and like having a great day, and I'm over here freezing with every piece of clothing I had on. I would say if there's anything I could have done differently, it would be start over or start earlier. Rich Sheridan, another great question. Do you have a bicycle to get around when you were docked? I don't have a bicycle. I have an electric scooter, which while a bicycle is probably better in terms of like actually getting some physical exercise, which is definitely a hard thing to do when you're on a boat in a confined space. I find that an electric scooter is much easier to store on a boat. It takes up less space. It's much easier to get it in and out of the dinghy, and then you get around just as efficiently. If you want to see a fun story about the electric scooter, go read back on my blog about the time that it was stolen outside of a grocery store in Sarasota, and me and the Sarasota Police Department spent a day basically tracking down where in the world is Carmen Sandiego scooter, and it had a positive outcome, and it was entertaining for everybody involved. Another question, when do you plan on going back to Chicago? Planning on going back, I want to be back in Chicago like May 10th at the latest. I've got a road rally that starts the 15th. Would love to be back closer to May 1st. It's just going to kind of depend on like weather and when I can get out of the Bahamas, get the boat into storage, and then get up. I guess we'll pause for a second. Jeff, are there any questions that have popped up in the room since I started reading the online questions?
Yeah, one more. Hold on. Thanks, Graham. It's Diane. It's great to hear from you. Great
Hey,
to
how are
see you.
you?
We miss you. I'm good. Tell us about Bosun and Harley and their experiences. Are they having fun?
Oh, you know what? I think they are. Bosun is my little shadow, and I can't be anywhere without him sitting next to me. So there's him. Hurley's over on the other couch staring at me like he always is. They haven't gotten seasick, and we've had some fairly rough. Yesterday was a pretty rough passage. They weren't seasick. They've pretty much now figured out that when they hear the sound of the engine start and they hear the anchor come up, that it means we're moving. And they spend the first part of that trip up on deck looking around, and then as soon as we either start to put sails up and heel or it gets rough, they kind of come down and figure out whichever side the low side is on, and they lay on that side. So they're pretty smart in that regard. They seem to be enjoying themselves. They seem happy. I mean, if you look at this trip from a dog's perspective, if your dog at home spends 8 hours a day at home by itself, whether that's roaming around the house or in a cage while you're at work, and then you come home and walk it and then spend the rest of the time inside, watching TV and making dinner and everything with it. A dog's perspective on a boat is probably pretty much the same thing, except I'm probably present a little bit more. They spend a bunch of time laying up on deck in the sun. They spend a bunch of time down here. We go for multiple walks a day, both for them and me. I will say the great thing about having dogs, and I used to say the same thing about living in Chicago in the winter, was having a dog forced you to get up and go for a walk and go outside. And there were a lot of days in the winter where I thought, like, man, if it wasn't for the dogs, I probably wouldn't have left my apartment for 3 days because I don't want to go out when it's 20 and windy and cold, but the dogs make you get up and go outside. It's the same thing here. There are days where I probably wouldn't go to shore, but I've got to take the dogs into shore, and it forces me to get up, get dressed, get in the dinghy, and go to town. So anything else in the room before I jump back to online questions?
Yeah, here's another one.
Okay.
Hey, Graham, Craig here. Good to see you.
Hey, Craig. Got your wine?
Indeed. Microphone in the left hand, glass of Chardonnay in the right.
There you go.
So now the Gypsy's been in a saltwater environment for a few months. Have you had to make any sort of adjustments to the maintenance routine? Or
Great question.
Effects on
Great
systems,
question.
whatever have you? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, Craig. So obviously when I got into saltwater, I swapped the zincs underneath the boat. Another place where having diving skills, or at least the spare air bottle, comes in handy. You don't have to haul out to change your zincs. You can do it underwater. So I did that. I will say it's amazing how much of this. So this boat was a freshwater boat. It was sold to somebody up in Green Bay in like 1984. Spent its entire life on Lake Michigan. It never left Lake Michigan. It's amazing how many of the fittings, how many of the stainless steel fittings all the way around the boat, you're starting to see a little bit of corrosion and rust on that was never there before. And this boat was always well maintained. It's one of the reasons I bought it. It was a very lovingly cared for boat. It was always covered in the winters. But I mean, when I bought it, it had been in storage for 3 years and there was no corrosion on anything. The engine in this boat looked brand new. It still does. There's no rust. I've been very vigilant about making sure that none of the seawater components on this engine leak. It is a freshwater cooled engine, meaning that it has a heat exchanger, so no salt water actually touches the engine block itself. But I've been pretty vigilant about keeping salt water out of the boat. But no, on the deck, on the standing rigging, even like where my swim ladder attaches, you start to see little rust stains from the stainless that you never saw before. I apologize if you hear snoring. That's Hurley. He's finally laid down for a nap. But no, that's a great question. For bottom paint, while we're on that subject, when I bought the boat and getting ready to go in the water this spring, I was kind of sure I was going to do this trip. So I didn't put VC17 on the boat like we normally do with sailboats in Lake Michigan. I actually sanded all that off, and I went with a Seahawk ablative paint that I had used on the wooden boat that came from saltwater that I had previously. And that paint was supposed to be good for fresh and salt, and it's actually proven to be great. I look at a lot of the other boat bottoms around me, and a lot of them are in way worse shape than this one. This boat's very clean. It also helps that I jump in the water and scrub it every week. So anything else in the room, Jeff?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. We got a couple more questions online, and then we will let you all run back to the bar. You mentioned insurance. Was it tough or expensive to get upgraded coverage from Lake Michigan to the Bahamas? No, it actually really wasn't. If I was going farther down the Caribbean chain, that'd be a different answer to that question. But even my regular Progressive boat insurance, I originally set it up for Great Lakes sailing. And then when I was sure I was going to do the trip, I upgraded it to coastal, I forget what they call it, coastal waters or whatever. And that wasn't a big price difference. And then when I called them when I was going to go to the Bahamas, and they were like, actually, your Progressive near or coastal waters sailing of the United States policy includes the Bahamas up to a certain point, and the point that it doesn't include, I wasn't going to go that far anyways. So no, it really hasn't been that much more expensive. I think my yearly insurance bill for this boat is about $1,200, which if you compare to what you pay for car insurance in Chicago is not bad at all. So yeah, it helps that this is an older boat. It's not worth as much as maybe some other boats. But that definitely does help. Steve Soka, what personality traits do you find make someone most suitable for a cruising partner, and what traits make someone the least suitable for a cruising partner? That's a great question. Just like when I was talking about planning that trip to the BVI's and picking friends to go with. If you're gonna have someone go cruising with you or visit or do a part of the trip with you, number one, you'd like to know how often or how easily they get seasick, because that's kind of a big thing out here. Number two would be just how flexible is that person. I have a lot of friends. I have friends that are great for trips like this, and I have friends that you couldn't pay me to bring on trips like this because they want a rigid schedule of we will be here, and we will be here at these exact times. Cruising doesn't work that way. Also, what's that person's tolerance for adventure? What's that person's tolerance for risk? I mean, going cruising is inherently risky. I met a couple today on a boat, a very nice couple, flew in from England to Fort Lauderdale, bought a sailboat, had it for like 3 weeks, sailed over here, coming into the inlet here, they touched bottom and cracked the keel. That boat is now probably totaled. It's getting towed to the salvage yard later this week. So like, what's your tolerance for risk? What's that person going to be like in a high pressure situation? Those of us in the room who are Mac racers, raise your hand, or who have done lots of distance sailing, raise your hand. You know that out there on the water, it can go from a beautiful champagne sailing day to now there's a squall, it's blowing 40, there's 5-foot seas. You've got to get the sails down and get reefs in, get everything closed up and put on your follies really quick. Those situations can be very stressful. They are very stressful. So understanding how that person tolerates risk and stress, and what their level of calm is going to be important in picking somebody to go cruising with you. Marsha asked, do you plan to do a drift snorkel through the mangroves on North Bimini? Highly recommended, and lobster. Actually, my cousin just texted me today and said, you're in Bimini, you got to go do this drift snorkel. So it's funny you mentioned that. That appears to be a big thing. So if the weather keeps me here a couple days, then yes, I absolutely will go do some drift snorkeling here. If you like being in the water and you like snorkeling and you like being underwater, the Bahamas is just, it's a playground for you. There's no better place. Except maybe Curacao. Alec, last question online. What courses would you recommend for folks with limited (parentheses couple years) cruising experience on Lake Michigan, but no experience in riverways or in the Caribbean, any for mechanical or engine work? If you want to take a class for cruising in the Caribbean, I highly recommend you look up U.S. Sailing or ASA. I personally like U.S. Sailing better, but they're both great. And finding a school that runs classes down in the British Virgin Islands, it's just the best place to go to learn how to sail, in my opinion. You've got islands that are close together. It's well protected. You've got good trade winds. It's fairly easy to get to from the US. I would go look up and try and spend a week doing one of those cruising classes. I used to teach them. It's one of my favorite memories ever, was spending weeks down there with people and teaching them how to cruise. It was really a lot of fun. There are some schools that do teach it in the Great Lakes, which is great. But I kind of like to use it as a way to get out of Chicago in the winter and go somewhere warm. So it doubled as a learning trip and a vacation. Also, if you're going to go down that way cruising, it's best to learn while you're down there. You'll kind of know what you're getting yourself into. No experience in inland rivers or waterways. The inland rivers and aren't that complicated. You're pretty much just going and following the river. You want to have charts, but that's like anywhere. You want to understand how the buoys work, red and green, but that's like anywhere. The inland rivers really are not that difficult. In fact, I would say they're easier than Lake Michigan because there's almost virtually no weather component. The only weather that really affected me on the inland rivers was fog in the morning. So if you sailed on Lake Michigan, I wouldn't worry too much about that. The only thing that will play with you is the current, which can come into play when you're docking. As far as engine and mechanical work, I don't know if anyone is still teaching a mechanical or engine class in Chicago. I know that I've talked with Crowley's about doing one for Chicago Yacht Club, but we never really got anywhere before I left. But Jeff, if there's any interest from the Nautical Education Committee about running a class like that this summer, I'd be happy to help get that going. We could also teach like a basic boat electrical class as well. I think that's something that's pretty valuable for the community. So that's it. That's all the oh, just kidding. Nope, that's it. That's all the questions online. And if there's anything else in the room, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, thanks for coming to hang out with me. It's great to interact with everybody, and I can't see everyone, unfortunately, but great to know you're there. And go enjoy some cocktails or some food at the bar. And thanks for coming.
Graham, yes. Yes, I'm going to speak for all of us here and just say thank you for spending the afternoon with us. You know, we've been watching you online on social media and everything, and now to see you that you are safe and happy makes all of us happy. So thank you again.
No problem. No problem. And thanks to Jeff and the Nautical Education Committee for asking me to do this. I was very humbled when they asked me, and I'm glad that we got to do it. If you enjoyed this, definitely check out the rest of the Nautical Education Committee's schedule. I know they've had a lot of great seminars, and they've got a lot more coming up, including some safety at sea and stuff like that. So definitely go check that out. And thanks for coming.
Okay, thanks again, Graham. All right, go enjoy that weather.
We'll see you guys.
All right, thanks.